Welcome to Season 3 of the Robertson and Easterling podcast. I'm Matt Easterling.
And I'm Craig Robertson. Matt and I are board-certified family law attorneys with decades of combined experience serving Mississippians throughout our fine state.
In 2019, we began wondering if the struggles our firm deals with on a daily basis could be used to help the general public. And from there, the Robertson and Easterling podcast was born.
During the first 2 seasons, we had open and honest discussions with everyday people about their individual relationship journeys, some ending in heartbreak and others in redemption, but all with powerful stories to tell.
In Season 3, you will hear more of the same stories from other marriage and divorce survivors, as well as from our new co-hosts, Eva and Roane Hunter from LifeWorks Counseling. Eva and Roane are both licensed professional counselors, and we're excited to partner with them and hear the different perspective they're going to have for all of our listeners.
Speaking of listening, if you're new to our podcast and haven't heard Seasons 1 and 2, be sure to check them out on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show. What you're about to hear is going to help.
Well, here we are. You're spending more time with us on the Robertson Easterling podcast, and I've got my sidekick, Roane Hunter, with me today.
Yep, glad to be here, riding shotgun once again.
So, as usual, we're sponsored by LifeWorks Counseling, and today we have 2 people that I've known and loved for a long time. It's unusual that if I'm not doing an adoption, that I get to sit down with a couple, but I'm doing so today, and I'm with Mark and Ellen. So, Ellen, thank you for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here.
And Mark, looking great.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. You look fantastic as well.
Our podcast is really about storytelling and the stories of people's lives. And Roane, that's really how our businesses are very similar, is we take people that we find in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, so much of what we do is just, we are collecting stories. We're going back and collecting and connecting the dots. In our case, we're hoping they work it out together, but that's not always the case. And then that's where you get to come in.
Well, and the good news or bad news is that I don't have to wish divorce on anybody because they seem to happen naturally.
Yeah, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
But today we're not talking about divorce. We're talking about marital restoration, and Mark and Ellen have an incredible story. I've heard them share it before, and they do it so well. And so, Ellen, let's just jump in. Tell us a little bit about life before Mark.
I grew up in a small town, very family-oriented. Everyone kind of knew each other, and my home life was wonderful. I can't really say any bad things about it. I was loved and adored by both of my parents. I had an older brother, and we both experienced wonderful things in our childhood. My dad kind of kept me on a pedestal and always thought that I hung the moon. And I felt like that in every situation. Now, he wasn't a father that didn't think I could do no wrong. If I did make a mistake, I was punished and there were consequences for those bad mistakes. But I felt safe and secure within my family. And I made family be my security. So when I lost a grandfather, I didn't feel safe. Or when my brother went off to college, I didn't feel safe. So I had put these people as something to make me feel safe. High school was great. I was very outgoing. I had a lot of friends. I didn't have any problem making friends. And I had a wonderful experience through that. Didn't really date in high school. I had no serious boyfriend. If someone did show an interest, it wasn't for very long. I had always instilled in myself that I wasn't going to have sex until I married. I accepted Jesus into my heart when I was in the 8th grade. And as a child, and I guess as high schooler, I thought Christianity was performance-based. So I thought if you do good and you act good, then God thinks you're good. And so I always wanted to be good. And so I never wanted to have sex or experience that in any way. And I wasn't a big drinker. I didn't experience with drugs any. And so when I went off to college, that was really hard for me because I was by myself. I had my friends there, but no family members. And so I kind of kept looking for something to be my new safety. After the first night at college, I wanted to go home. I called my mom and dad crying, saying, please come pick me up, or I'm driving home. And they said, no, you give it 2 weeks and then we'll talk again. And I'm so glad they said that because I had the best time ever at college. Made some great lifelong friends. Never really had any serious boyfriends. I never felt tempted to experience with sex there or drugs or alcohol. I did drink some socially, but I didn't choose a drug or anything to medicate some of the stresses that come along with college while I was there. And I guess I first met Mark my sophomore year. I had a date to a football game with a friend of his and met him through the friend, my date. And I always thought he was so cute and fun. And he was so outgoing and obnoxious that he got a lot of attention. It was so opposite of everything I was.
Now, Mark, you've just been called obnoxious by your wife. He's fondly remembering her first interaction with you, but tell our listeners a little bit about your backstory.
Gosh, I grew up in a little bit larger city. I went to a small private school. I was the first child, so I received a lot of attention, good and bad. And it's taken me a long time to learn things about my parents. But basically, the conclusions that I've come up with is that my dad was somewhat emotionally absent. And for that, my mom overcompensated and kind of became emotionally incestual. So it was a very weird dynamic at my house. I can remember always feeling like something was off, or maybe something was wrong with me. So unlike my wife, I needed something to medicate. I felt like I needed to medicate the feelings that were going on inside of me. I first started really struggling around in ninth grade, just socially awkward. Like she said, I became somewhat crazy and obnoxious to gain attention for myself. I remember it being a really, really hard year. My parents took me all over the state to try to find me help and try to figure out what was going on with me. Tried to medicate me using anxiety, depression meds, ADHD drugs, trying to figure out just anything to try to help me because there certainly was a need for something. Nothing really worked, but somehow I kind of poured into sports and became a pretty good basketball player and received a lot of attention for that. And everything went away, really, until I graduated high school. And then I went to college. And there was nobody watching me in college. I could do whatever I wanted. And I went absolutely nuts my freshman year in college. I experimented with just about every drug that you can imagine. It kind of came to a head in my spring semester. I had a girlfriend. And she broke up with me and ended up trying to take my own life. And I can just remember feeling like so out of control in that moment and just wanting everything to stop and all of the feelings and anxiety and pressure. And man, I just didn't want to be here anymore. I can look back now and kind of feel like it was maybe just a real loud cry for help. But I spent around 3 days in ICU for that. And then for some reason, my parents just allowed me to go back to Mississippi State and go back to college and ended up doing kind of the exact same things I was doing and ended up selling drugs, trying to pay for my habit. And by the time the summer ended after my freshman year, I was in a drug and alcohol rehab facility. I spent 6 months there trying to get my life back on track. And really, to be honest with you, that's where I felt the most safe, the most sane. That's where I really learned what it meant to live a life of sobriety and a life in recovery. And I loved it. It was great. But it was kind of like that portion of my life had to end at some point, and I had to leave the facility at some point, and I did. And eventually kind of found my way going back and doing the same exact things I'd done before. My junior year in college is when I finally met Ellen, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen before. And the only thing was she didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she didn't do drugs, she was nothing like me. But what I saw in her was somebody who could kind of reel in the train here, kind of reel it in and keep the train on the tracks. That's what I saw and felt when I was with her. And that feeling to me made me feel safe.
Well, Ellen, now we've heard Mark tell a very different story about his childhood than yours. What attracted you to Mark during that season of your life?
He thought I was the best thing. He thought I had hung the moon. He put me on that pedestal just like my dad had done when I was a child. He adored me. He used his words to just ooh and ah over me. And I felt that instant, okay, this guy, I feel safe. Someone has, put me up on this pedestal again. And also, he was everything I wasn't. And it was kind of like, oh, well, maybe this is fun. Maybe, let's go live a different way because that looks kind of fun. And so I had this structure. My parents were not strict at all. They socially partied, but this was the wild and crazy. This was the other extreme. And so I was drawn to someone that was totally different than I was. And the first words he said to me after coming back from the rehab, when I walked by him, he said, "Will you marry me?" I'll never forget. We were at a
pretty smooth, wasn't it, Craig?
That was a smooth move, but it turns out that you did actually agree to marry him.
You said yes.
I did say yes then, and I did again too.
So let's talk about that then. You guys decided to make a life together. Talk about your married life together.
Everything to last has to be built on a strong foundation. And looking back now, there was not even any form of a foundation at the beginning of our marriage. I can say for myself that your friends are all getting married, you're going to parties, you're having a good time. I loved Mark. I kind of got caught up in I want to get married too.
I've heard a client, and I think she was a guest on the podcast, say that the person she married was just the guy that she was standing next to when the music stopped. And she looked around and everybody else was getting married, and then later everybody else was having babies. It just seemed like, as a Southern woman, the next thing to do.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's what people ask, where are you going to college? Where are you going to get your job? When are you getting married? When are you going to have a baby? And so it was like I would get glimpses of a good guy. And so that's one of the reasons I think that kept me there too with Mark is I saw the good guy inside, but then I would see this totally different guy that I didn't know sometimes. So marriage, even starting the first year was really hard. We both had jobs. We were both working. I was teaching school. And so he was still wanting to party and go out and go to the bars. And I had to be at work at 7, and I didn't want to be a part of that. I kind of thought, okay, we're grown-ups now. We can have a good time on the weekends, but we need to settle down a little bit more. And I felt like my needs didn't matter then. And so I suppressed all of that and kept all that in for so long. And I thought, if he's happy, then we'll be happy. So I really lost myself for many, many years in the marriage. And alcohol was present all the time. Like any social event we went to, there was always alcohol and there was always way too much to drink. And he was very ugly and disrespectful to me.
Roane, just to pull you into the conversation, it seems like what Ellen is describing is kind of a common vernacular among people that are married and when there's trouble.
Oh, yeah. Kind of what I hear is just that piece. You grow up with a dad and you've got dad on the pedestal. He put you on a pedestal, but you had him on one too.
Definitely.
And then certainly that's just your model. And so you get married, you've got a husband, and you put him on the pedestal thinking that he's just going to be like your dad and he's going to do the next right thing. And it was a little different story. And so often when we get married, everybody's putting their best foot forward. A lot of this was hidden and you did not see it. And then once you get married is when it all starts to show up.
So Mark, what about you? So you asked this girl that you apparently hardly knew to marry you at first, and then later you actually talked her into doing it for real. So what about you? What was that first season of marriage like for you?
I remember it being very, very hard. I remember arguing a lot. It was like we were both, I'm going to speak for me. I was so selfish. I felt like every desire and every need that I had, she needed to meet. I put a lot of emphasis on her meeting my needs and desires at all times. I really, truly thought, I mean, it's a very narcissistic way of thinking, but I thought that I was the only person on the earth that mattered. And really, you know, what I saw growing up was I saw my mom attempting to do that with my dad. He never had to lift a finger at home. And that's what I expected when I got married. And that is not the way it really goes in real life. You know, later I figured out that my mom was doing that for my dad because of a codependency problem. And, you know, she also felt like if she made him happy, therefore she was going to be happy. So there was no separation between the two people. It was all about one guy and his needs. And as long as those needs were met, then everybody was going to be happy.
And Mark, I think you've described the way that I described the way most proposals go, right? It's like we get down on one knee and we look at our future wife and we say, honey, I love me and I love me so much. I want you to love me like I love me. And I know you're going to love me the way that I love me. I'm so excited. Will you love me? And will you marry me?
100%. Could not agree more.
That's the way it starts out.
Could not agree more. And then, you know, you throw in, as I've stated earlier, you know, I medicate. That's what I've done in my past. And you throw in the need and desire for sex. I always felt that I was entitled to sex. And that started kind of throwing me down a bad path. When sex was being withheld for any reason whatsoever, I felt entitled to go outside of our marriage and find it elsewhere, which is also, you know, one of the worst seasons of our life and our marriage.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. So you guys are married. You have this sense of Ellen's job is to make you happy. And when that didn't work out just right, you tried to find that in other places.
I constantly felt like I needed more. And if it felt good, I needed more. Well, I want to say that the first time that I ever cheated on my wife was on my bachelor party. Met a girl at a bar, out of control, ended up sleeping with her. And that kind of started me on a path of, gosh, that felt good. The rush felt so good. And having someone different want me felt so good. And I knew that I wanted that feeling more and more. I began to pursue other women. And it always starts out like I'd go on a trip and I'd do it out of town. Okay, well, I'm not going to do it in town or with anybody I know. And then the next thing you know, I'm doing it with somebody in town that I know that's a friend of both of ours. And that turns into a long-term affair. And man, it kept snowballing and snowballing. And Ellen started finding out smaller things, started asking questions.
But those times I did ask questions, I was quickly made to feel really stupid and dumb and put down for why would you even think that? And so then I would start to ask myself, like, okay, well, maybe I am dumb. I started believing the things that would come out of Mark's mouth about myself.
Well, what you were experiencing was gaslighting, obviously.
Absolutely. Yes. And so I didn't know what to believe at the time. And there were times when we could be at a social event and it could be late in the night and I'd say, okay, why don't we head home? He's like, well, I'm not ready to go home. You can go home, but I'm not coming home. I was starting to feel uncomfortable. There were people that were really drunk. And so I would leave. Well, he would turn his cell phone off and I wouldn't see him until the next morning. You know, and then the next day he was mad at me because I left. So I left him in a situation where he had to stay somewhere else. And I almost caught him with the mutual friend that he discussed. I was stopping at the post office and I saw him coming like from an apartment complex. And I knew that the friend lived there. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, he pulled into the post office. Oh, I'm getting the mail for work. Well, I knew that at work they had someone that did that. And so he quickly made me feel dumb about that again and minimized any feelings that I might be having, about figuring out something was going on.
Let's talk about that just a little bit. What I've heard you describe is that there were clues. There were things that were happening. Your intuition was telling you that things weren't right, but the language being spoken into you from Mark was one of, no, that's not the way things are. And it made you almost question your intuition and the clues that were being left behind that maybe things weren't right.
Exactly. Yes. And it was again another dark time when I lost myself. And if losing Mark meant I wasn't safe. So again, he became my drug at the time. I still need this around. I want to feel safe. If I say something or confront him or leave him, then I'm not safe anymore, which is not a healthy message. And so our children were born during all of this, or one was born. And the dynamic in the house was not very stable for her. And I tried so hard to protect her from the things that were going on. The people would come over. There's lots of alcohol. Daddy's had too much to drink tonight. Beer bottles were on the kitchen counter. Never once did I put my foot down and say, this can't happen anymore, or I'm leaving and taking our child with me, which I do regret sometimes not removing her from those situations. And so it was a dark time for her.
Hey, this is Eva Hunter at LifeWorks Counseling. At LifeWorks, our couples intensive is focused on developing healthy relational dynamics and true intimacy. Couples do not have to have it all together or even be sure they want to stay together. Couples that have been on the brink of divorce with papers filed have not only stayed together, they have built something new from the rubble left behind. Real issues are addressed using experiential therapy and a systemic framework for ongoing growth and healing. Couples develop a growth plan that emphasizes personal growth and inviting the other to show up, connect, and journey together. LifeWorks Counseling, the science and soul of connection.
Hey, I'm Matt Easterling. Thanks for listening to a podcast. I hope you're finding these stories insightful and comforting. If you relate to anything you've heard so far, or if you just want more information, you can request a consultation right from our website by completing a simple online form. Of course, you're also free to just give us a call. Family law is all we do. As experts, we have the information and advice you need to move forward, whatever that may look like for you. We would love to be in your corner. Until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy part 2 of today's show.
So, Mark, I'm hearing Ellen's version of the story, and it sounded like in a lot of ways you were having her doubt herself. But now there were other people around you that weren't being fooled by the charade.
Yes. So as each of you know, addicts can make those closest to you crazy. And I think I was definitely doing that to Ellen. And I had a weekend, I was down on the Gulf Coast and kind of went nuts. And I want to say that, something like 3 different partners and 3 different nights. And I kind of did it out in the open where some of my friends saw. Well, I have a really good friend, person that I've known my whole life, who actually took me to lunch and confronted me and said that, hey, this is what I know, what's going on. And it actually, for me, man, it was a relief. To be honest with you, I had been living this way and I was tired of living this way, and I was going to continue to spin out until I blew everything up in my world. And in a way, it was kind of like, okay, here's the blow up. This behavior can now stop. So I immediately left and went home. And I want to say I called a pastor friend of ours and kind of asked him, how should I disclose this to my wife? No training wheels, just went right home and told her. I did not tell her everything. I did not tell her details. I did not tell her with who. I held back as much as I could to try to protect myself. And at the time, I felt like I was protecting her, but really it was about protecting myself.
So, Ellen, Mark comes home and he says this to you. Did you immediately pick up the phone and call a divorce lawyer and say, I'm done with him and that I'm going to move forward in a different direction?
That probably should have been my first step. But a few days before that, I could see the marriage was spiraling. And I had a prayer and that said, Lord, whatever you have to do to bring this marriage together, please do it. And he brought it all crashing down. I mean, he, brought us both to our knees. And I found the information out, and I remember there was a cup by the bathtub, and I threw the cup. And I think I got sick to my stomach, and I left and immediately went to a friend's house. I was afraid of divorce. I was afraid what the other side looked like financially. I had always been told if we argued, about is there somebody else, and word divorce came up, he was like, you're not going to be able to afford an attorney. you'll never, because I'll have all the money. At that time I wasn't working. So I feared my own protection. So it's almost like, let me stay and have a horrible life, because I can't do this outside on my own. And I did not want to upset my parents, who I will say, they do a great job of sweeping things under the rug and everything looks good. So when I did find out, I really wanted to control who knew and who didn't know, because I'm supposed to have it all together. I'm supposed to be good. Like, I have this outward appearance, which I was dying inside and I was crushed. The girl was actually a tennis partner of mine, but I didn't know at the time. And so we were immediately, that was like on a Monday or Tuesday, we were immediately hooked up with Roane and Eva on a Thursday. And I remember driving to their house and they sat with us at their kitchen table. And Eva started and shared their story. And I remember crying, but she was so stoic and shared that so well. I thought, how can she even talk about this without crying? And I didn't even know what was waiting for us on the other side. They are such great examples of that there can be hope in this. But at the time, I was so broken, but yet I was getting staggered information from Mark. And so it was almost like I was re-hurt over and over. Like, I didn't know who it was, but then 3 weeks later I find out. And then I find out where and other people. And so it was staggered to where that I was hurt over and over.
Roane, is what you're hearing from Ellen about how these disclosures happen, is that pretty common?
Oh, it is. And it's even the way that Eva and I did it back in the day, but it's certainly not what we recommend. We call it the kitchen table disclosure, the staggered disclosure. And, when we're working with a couple, we take them through a very formal process of disclosure. And, just for our listeners, the dozens and dozens of listeners, when y'all came to our house, we did not have our counseling practice. We were marriage mentors with our church. And so that's why you came to our house. And then certainly just knowing you guys for so long and now, we obviously started our practice and did all that. But just to see where you guys were and where you are today it's so hopeful for so many people, because, it was a tough spot. There's no doubt.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because we've heard from Ellen about that experience. Mark, I guess that was a wake-up call. Your friend had confronted you and had told you that this behavior needed to stop, and you, out of fear that you were going to be found out, go and you tell Ellen yourself, and it's kind of the slow drip method. You tell her a little bit, and then a little bit later she finds out more, and she expressed that it was kind of like she was being re-hurt over and over again. At that point, I'm sure that you learned your lesson and vowed that this was never going to happen again.
100% thought, I'm never going through this again. I can remember having this weight lifted off. That's what I felt like. I felt like I dropped a bomb, and it had been there for a long time, 5, 7 or 8 years, something like that. I'd been doing this for a long time, and it was finally lifted off of me. But through that, man, I was just absolutely destroying my wife each time another disclosure happened of an event or a person, because there was a lot. It was a lot to put on her, and I felt like what we did was we kept sweeping those things under the rug and just putting on a happy face and acting like everything was okay. And to a certain extent it was. I started for the first time really kind of digging in. I went to see Roane privately for a while. He was working on his counseling degree at the time, I believe. And so I would get to go see Roane for free, and Roane would get some hours.
He was practicing already.
Yeah. And we'd have a great time for an hour just talking about gosh knows what. And it was great. And, he kind of got to know me and I got to know him. And so we loved being around each other. So it was a really good thing for me.
What was the turning point in your life, Mark?
After the affairs stopped, the anxiety and depression and all of that is still there. So the acting out behaviors have finally stopped. But I'm still having to medicate the anxiety and all of the really bad feelings that I kept having about myself. So
legitimately medicate them.
Legitimately medicating. So, man, the drinking ramped up. and started taking opiates and really started kind of diving back into drugs and just trying to keep it all together, kind of trying to keep it all down, trying to medicate all the shame and the guilt and anxiety that I've had throughout my whole life. And Ellen noticed that. And so, she became unsafe again and didn't feel like this was a home that she wanted our children being raised in.
Yeah. And let me go back to, so I'm just going to kind of circle back to when we started with Roane and Eva, and they were both working on their counseling degree. And we probably went 4 or 5 times, and we thought, we've got it all together. We've got the tools now. We can go out and do this. And we really believed that. And so we thought, let's just try this again. And for a while, it was really great. But now looking back, we had just opened the book. Like, we hadn't even started reading any of it. And so things kind of came to a head again. About 6 years later, yes, the drinking ramped up. The drugs were there, and I was not aware of any of that. I thought, oh, he's drunk. Oh, he's tired. I made excuses in my head for it. I had some friends start in my ear saying, hey, Mark was at the swimming pool and he was kind of inappropriately with another woman in the swimming pool in front of several people. And my children were there with him, and he had been drinking. And so I was really more concerned with him drinking and driving my kids home. So again, I confronted, and everything was, made to feel stupid. I was not doing that. So-and-so was drunk too. They just think that. So he minimized all of it again. Well, I remember him getting so drunk, I guess the following weekend. And I was like, this is it. I can't do this anymore. So I grabbed both of my girls by the hand, walked down the hallway and said, I can't do this anymore, and jumped in my car. And he immediately called me and said, come home. And I said, no. I just rode around and listened to probably a princess movie. He begged me to come home. And for once, I was kind of trying to put my foot down. But then I'm thinking, oh, he's going to change all the money over. Can I go stay at a hotel? Can I go to my parents? I didn't know. So I came back home being the codependent person I am. And I ended up going to church on that Wednesday night. He laid in the fetal position in the bed and said, I need to talk to Roane. I need to talk to Roane. I need to talk to Roane. He was too afraid to talk to me about everything until he saw Roane. But everything came to the blow again. There were multiple more affairs. And I would have been the first person to tell their best friend, you pack your stuff up and leave. Like, get out of there. But I didn't do any of that.
And I'm really interested because we've heard about Mark's drugs and medicating with opioids and with sex and with alcohol. But you said it earlier as we were talking, you said that he became your drug.
Absolutely.
And you weren't finished with him.
Exactly.
And so what was the transformation that took place that put you in a situation where you're even here today talking about this as a married couple?
And I also will say shopping was another drug of mine, spending money. He seemed, again, broken again, but he was committed. He was surrounded by all the tools and all the community that he needed to get through this. And so, again, we start going to Roane and Eva again. And I'm still have a distorted view, and I'm thinking, well, let's just fix him. He's the broken one. And then our marriage will be okay. It wasn't until a few years later, or maybe a year later, that let's start looking at Ellen. But it was time in counseling to start looking at Ellen and why I was allowing these things to continue in my marriage. I will say at that point, we started into counseling. We were committed every single week. No matter if we had to eat tuna fish out of the can, we were going to be there. And it was not always great. We were, some days we would leave holding hands. Some days we would leave not even speaking. I can look back and it's like, man, if you just put your head down and go through it, it's so worth it. And I know that's easier said than done, but what we dug up inside both of us and through our lives, everything came to light. And I became fully known by my husband, and he became fully known by me which was so unique, where you see so many people are on the surface, and the way that I lived was always on the surface.
Ellen, what was a key to you? What do you, looking back now, thinking about your life, thinking about your marriage and relationship with Mark, what would you say was the key to you guys turning the corner in your marriage?
Well, the key would be Roane and Eva. The key would be the knowledge of our counselors to believe in us and to guide us along the path of restoration. We could not have done that on our own. And we tried it. We attempted that, and then it all failed again. And we went to an intensive, and that to me was kind of my turning point. That was when one of the leaders of the intensive, Eli was actually ours, he told me to lie on the floor, on my stomach. And Mark put his foot on my back, and he said, "That's how your relationship is right now."
Wow.
And he said, "Is this how you want to stay?" And I said, "No, I want to get up."
And not only did that happened with other couples observing what was taking place. So what you've described is that you were laying on your stomach on the ground and he had his foot on your back. And that was a representation of how you guys had been living your life. What a powerful picture.
It was. It definitely was.
Roane, for our listeners who aren't familiar with the intensive weekends that you guys do for married couples, talk a little bit about that.
We bring in two therapists, Jim Kress and Eli Machen, one of whom Ellen mentioned. It's 3 days, and the couples are working not individually, but they're working in a group with 5 other couples. So you've got 2 therapists and 6 couples in a room. And one of the most powerful pieces, and I think you guys would attest, is watching the other couples do their work.
Absolutely.
And how much you absolutely learn and become aware of even your own stuff, because it's so much easier to see it in the other couples oftentimes it is to see in ourselves. And it's a powerful 3 days of how this stuff plays out in every marriage, whether there's infidelity or not. We all have some kind of crazy dance, some kind of drama that we all play out, and it usually winds up in intensity instead of intimacy. And in the process, we're moving to true intimacy and not intensity.
Mark, if I gave you a microphone and put you in front of a room full of people who were living out the same story that you were, what do you think would be the key thing that you would want to communicate to that group of people in your life? What was the catalyst for change in your life?
For me, it was I saw somebody, and his name is Roane Hunter, but I saw somebody who had been through the things that I'd been through and who was on the other side of it, who was living really well. And I decided, I want that. That's what I want. And thankfully, this guy happened to be my counselor. And so whatever he did, whatever he told me to do, I did it. And that's how it started for me.
So what I've heard both of you say is essentially you connected with wise counsel and you listened to what they said and you tried to follow as best you could their advice and you kept showing up in the process.
We connected with their story, which to us was beautiful. It was about redemption and it was about God and it was about just change and how you can go from one end of the spectrum to the other. And that's what we needed because we were so broken. Ellen talked earlier about me being in the fetal position and that 100% that happened. I didn't know what to do. I thought, I'm so bad. No one should love me, could love me ever. And from that day forward, I just started moving forward. Whatever Roane told me to do, I did. And slowly, by doing that, trust started to be built. And Ellen started to look at me and say, wow, what's going on with him? He truly is different. On January 11th of 2015, that's the day I stopped drinking. I have never taken opiates again. Porn and masturbation were gone. Affairs outside of my marriage were gone. Any type of unhealthy sexual behavior was gone. That's the day that everything changed for us.
Sobriety is what changed for you guys.
Sobriety, yes.
But now sobriety is not just the freedom from alcohol or drugs or sex. What did sobriety look like for you?
For me, sobriety is living well. and living healthy and holy.
Well, and you can't do it alone.
100%. You cannot do this alone. You know, what is broken in relationship can also be healed in relationship. So I have a community of people out there who are just like me, who think like me, feel like me, and we do life together. We talk, we get in there deep. It's been an amazing journey. It's been the most difficult thing that I've ever done, but it's also been the most rewarding thing that I've ever done. And through all of it, like Ellen and I were talking the other day, you know, we genuinely enjoy spending time together. It's something that we look forward to. We know, you know, I was the guy that you could never get him to leave the party, or it was. Now I don't even want to go to the party, just as long as Ellen and I can sit around together and laugh. And it's been an unusual, beautifully crazy journey.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds like the title of the podcast.
I think that's a good one. You know, Ellen, I sat with someone even earlier today, a partner, and one of the things, she's really stuck in that anger phase, and she's having a hard time letting go of that. And Eva looked at her and said, you need some other women.
Yes.
Because she, you know, right now her husband can't comfort that hurt.
Absolutely.
So I know you've experienced that. Talk about that for a minute.
I'm going to just make a weird reference, but as a mother, you look around when your children are potty training or not sleeping through the night, and you can get counsel through that. Like, hey, what worked for you? Or you've got people to turn to. Well, when something like this happens, you can't turn to your friends because it's not happening to them. You walk in the grocery store, and I remember thinking, has her husband cheated on her? Has her husband, like, I felt alone and isolated until we started coming to you and Eva. And that was when a foundation that had never been there before was starting to be built. And y'all hooked us up with a community. I feared the community because I feared of being known to other women. I thought that was a fear, but actually it was freedom. And when I sat with them the first night, I think I cried the whole first night I went. But then it was like, I can't wait to go back and to connect and to ask questions and to have women that were further along in this journey than I was. You know, well, hey, what did this look like for you? Or I don't feel safe. Like the communication was just so freeing. And I want to say during this restoration time, as I refer to Mark being my drug, Ellen came back. Like her needs mattered. Her emotions mattered. And so the girl that I had lost for so many years and I had pushed down was finally back. And that was so freeing for me as a person, and to be loved and safe with these women in the community. And like you said, with the intensive, seeing the other couples play out and verbalize, what's going on in their marriage, that felt really awesome too, to have that connection.
Well, guys, we're unfortunately almost out of time, but I do want to ask you guys one last little series of questions. Mark, what are you looking forward to?
I kind of just take this day by day, but as for today, I'm looking forward to going home tonight and hanging out with my wife, not having any shame or guilt about it. And I look forward to the intimacy with her, and I'm not referring to sex. We have a beautifully intimate relationship, and I enjoy just being with her.
Ellen, how about you?
Mine's kind of the same. We usually have a time in the evening where we sit and kind of say, hey, what went on during your day? Or what are you looking forward to? Or what are you anxious about? So it's being heard and having conversations and intimacy that's non-sexual, that feels safe and it feels good.
Roane, any last thoughts?
I just would say you guys are a picture of willingness. What can happen when two people are willing? I mean, even Jesus said, when we talk about adultery being, grounds for divorce, and certainly it is. But Jesus said, well, The reason that was given was because of the hardness of heart. And that just indicates a lack of willingness when the addict or the offending spouse is willing to do the work, to repent, to put the time in, to make the effort, then by all means, it's worth giving it a shot for sure. And the willingness has to be there. And certainly you guys are just a beautiful picture of that process. Love you both.
You've been listening to the Robertson Easterling podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
If you need our help, we're here for you. You can request a consultation from our website 24 hours a day. It takes less than 5 minutes. If you like our show, subscribe today on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite podcast player so you can be one of the first to know when our next episode drops. You can also join us on social media. We're on all the major platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Have a great rest of your day, and remember, there is nothing wrong with arming yourself with information. On behalf of the Robertson Easterling family, thanks for spending time with us.
Hey, this is Eva Hunter from LifeWorks Counseling. At LifeWorks, our counselors seek to integrate healthy faith-based principles with sound clinical skills. Whether you're struggling in a relationship or have feelings that hinder your ability to be all you were created to be, one of our trained counselors can help. We seek to partner with you as our client to find the freedom to live the life God intended for you. We offer our experience, strength, and hope to promote healthy relationships built on intimacy and trust. LifeWorks Counseling, the science and soul of connection.
This podcast is not a substitute for an attorney. All information is provided as a general reference and public service. Listening to this podcast does not create a professional relationship with Robertson and Easterling, LifeWorks Counseling, or any of its attorneys or guests. This podcast may be considered advertising under applicable rules, and free background information is available upon request. For more information, please visit our website, robertson.ms.